harbors a dark secret.
He had no identification on him. There was only the clothes that he was wearing.
Signs of violence and tragedy.
I wasn't too sure if we had an accident or something else.
There are signs of black magic, too, and hints of a blacker psyche.
I think that the motivation was to carry out a perfect crime.
Investigators will have to probe the fringes of mysticism and call in the experts at North Mission Road to help crack a haunting mystery. Chatsworth, California, located on the far edge of LA County. Its rugged terrain made it an ideal backdrop for Hollywood westerns. Even today, much of Chatsworth remains a remote and rocky outpost. On June 22, 1990, just hours after the summer solstice had ended, some hikers came upon an old railroad tunnel in a local park.
This tunnel is frequented by several different types of people going in for different purposes.
The tunnel was used by transients for shelter, by teenagers for thrill-seeking, and by others for illicit reasons.
There was always rumor, and it was kind of somewhat substantiated by some of the writings in the tunnel, the graffiti, that people that were interested in the occult would go up there. It was known locally as the Manson Tunnel.
Inside the tunnel, the hikers found a young man in their path, dead. A few hours earlier, a few miles away, Galen and Kay Baker had received an anonymous call.
What do you want? It was a male voice, obviously disguised as his voice. Right. We've got your son. We're holding him hostage. We want $100,000.
The Bakers had a 20-year-old son, Ron. He was an astrophysics major at UCLA, living in an area called Van Nuys.
I thought it was a prank, but I did call his apartment, and I was told that his roommates had left him at the bus stop in Van Nuys, and he hadn't returned.
Mr. Baker wasn't overly concerned, but the next morning, he became anxious.
I got another phone call with the same type of message. At that point, I did think there was something wrong, so I did call the police.
Police launched an investigation and put a trace on the family phone line. But both efforts were futile.
Mayday 14-825 on Tech 2.
Back in Chatsworth Park, Sandra Fitzgerald, an investigator for North Mission Road, had arrived at the scene.
I wasn't too sure if we had an accident with somebody who'd been in the wrong place when a train had come through.
She quickly performed a head-to-toe examination and discovered severe trauma. The body was transported to North Mission Road. There, the medical examiner pronounced the manner of death.
This was an obvious homicide from the beginning.
The man had multiple stab wounds covering his torso and legs.
And he had what appeared to be defensive wounds on his hand as well.
The victim was immediately labeled John Doe number 135, and every inch of his body was scrutinized for clues.
At the scene of a crime, there's very often a struggle, and the person struggling is going to be engaging contact with this perpetrator.
Cormier had honed techniques often used to help victims literally finger their killer.
Under the fingernails, we're going to find primarily either tissue or fluids from the scene of the crime.
Blood, hair, or skin scratched off during a struggle with the killer might be under John Doe's fingernails. This trace evidence might confirm or rule out suspects. But investigators still didn't know whose murder they were probing.
He had no identification on him. There was only the clothes that he was wearing.
Many cases are unsolved because the victim wasn't identified. As time passes, the trail to the killer becomes fainter. Time was becoming a factor. Only a few miles from North Mission Road, Ron Baker's parents nervously awaited news of their missing son.
I didn't hear anything more, and I called his apartment again, and they said no, he still hadn't returned.
A possible kidnapping. A homicide in a remote tunnel. How would investigators connect the two crimes? A young man has been stabbed to death on the summer solstice. He has no ID, but he is wearing an occult symbol.
It was a pendant, a pentagram pendant on a twine around his neck.
And I knew that that could be considered something that people who were into the occult would wear.
A pentagram around the victim's neck. A crime scene with occult graffiti. These were possible leads.
Chatsworth Park is an area where cult-type activities do occur. Due to all these circumstances, we're certainly not ruling out the possibility that the death was cult-related. We're looking at that possibility very strongly at this point.
As LAPD's investigators broached the edges of mysticism, the experts at North Mission Road focused on the medical forensics. Dr. Eva Huser performed the autopsy. One of the conclusions was that the victim had been drinking.
He had fairly high blood alcohol level, and you would expect him to have slurred speech and difficulty in standing straight. And
had the victim died in a drunken brawl? If so, it had been unusually brutal. In addition to his neck wound, the victim had been stabbed 18 times. Dr. Huser took meticulous measurements, seeking clues that might help police find the murder weapon.
in this case, it seems that the cuts were made by an approximately 3-inch knife.
Investigators ran a check on fingerprints taken from the victim.
Let's see who we got.
No matches were found. Then, 2 days later, it was detectives investigating the kidnapping of Ron Baker. He was still missing. Detectives wanted to know if North Mission Road had someone matching his description.
The coroner's office and the detectives from the kidnapping investigation conferred.
Detectives provided a photo of Ron Baker. The coroner checked its files. A match was made. John Doe 135 was no longer unidentified, and Ron Baker was no longer missing.
He was a very loving person, and he cared deeply about people.
The Bakers were unable to provide a single lead. They suspected no one. Their son had no enemies. So detectives began interviewing Ron's friends. They started with his two roommates, Nathan Blaylock and Duncan Martinez, who worked together. Duncan was a family friend.
Duncan was a polite, easygoing person, and we always liked him. We couldn't believe a lot of the stories that he told, but he was a likable guy.
Duncan and Nathan told investigators that on the night Ron disappeared, he was going to UCLA.
The two roommates, Nathan and Duncan, told Ron they would take him up to the bus stop.
Ron never returned. Police searched Baker's apartment, but the occult theory led nowhere. Ron's interest in mysticism actually involved a group of UCLA students more interested in philosophy than Satanism.
We came to believe that the occult had nothing to do with the murder of Ron Baker.
If Ron Baker hadn't died for reasons of the paranormal, why had he died? And who had killed him? The investigation into the death of a college student has no suspects, no motive, and no murder weapon. As police regrouped, the Baker family and friends gathered for the funeral. One of Ron's roommates, Duncan Martinez, gave a eulogy.
It's just hard to think of a time without Ron. He's always been there.
He did get very emotional and kind of broke down a little bit up in front of the church.
I miss him a lot too. And I just hope that it's something I can get over.
Investigators weren't buying Duncan's remorse. When Martinez was originally questioned, his behavior was suspicious. Detectives thought he might know something about how and why his friend had died. And Ron's parents found an odd note in a box that Duncan was storing in their garage.
I found a scrap of paper with a to-do list on it. Among other things on that list was to get a new identification, to sell his car. So I did turn that over to the detectives.
Why would Duncan want a new identity? Detectives asked him to take a lie detector test. Taking a chance he could beat it, Martinez agreed.
What the polygraph showed is that he was deceptive, majorly deceptive, in literally every key question.
Investigators began probing deeper. Was Duncan protecting someone? Did he know who made the ransom call to Ron's father?
Detectives called to ask me if I thought it was possible that it was Duncan who made the phone call. I was very surprised. I said, I can't believe it would have been Duncan.
Detectives searched for more evidence, but no signs of foul play turned up.
and then we sent him on his way. We had nothing to hold him on.
Duncan Martinez and Nathan Blaylock, the other suspect, went about their lives. Then, exactly 1 month after the murder, Duncan vanished. Investigators were suspicious, but they had no legal basis to try finding him. Months passed. Then years. It looked like the murder of Ron Baker might never be solved.
Honestly, I didn't know if we'd ever find out what happened.
Then in June of 1992, detectives got what they called the magic phone call. It was an attorney calling on behalf of Duncan Martinez regarding the Ron Baker murder. His client wanted to talk, and he was willing to reveal the killer.
At this point, he wanted to cut a deal with us and with the district attorney's office and told us that he would testify against Nathan Blaylock if he received immunity in the crime.
His motivation in coming forward was he had disappeared, quote unquote, off the face of the earth. That lifestyle is not a fun lifestyle for people to live. How long could he keep running like that?
Duncan told detectives about a devious plan he cooked up with his roommate, Nathan Blaylock.
He and Nathan were sitting around watching television one night, and it was a police show, and it was about a botched kidnapping.
They were so intrigued, it sparked a sinister idea. Could they pull off their own kidnapping successfully?
This sounds unusual, but if you knew the two personalities, the Duncan and the Nathan, you could see this happening. And according to Duncan, Nathan said, hey, we should do that.
Ultimately, I think that the motivation was to carry out a perfect crime. And their very good friend, Ron Baker, was a victim of it, a pawn.
But kidnapping Ron Baker posed a problem. Ron could never be released because he would identify them. Duncan told detectives that he and Nathan lured Ron to Chatsworth Park.
He didn't drink, so they got him drunk to loosen him up, so that he'll walk into a train tunnel that's totally dark.
They know they're going to kill him. He has no idea it's coming.
Nathan trips, and Ron makes a comment about him not being able to walk. And Nathan goes off, jumps on him, and begins stabbing him.
But the cops weren't sure if Duncan was telling the truth, and they were also worried a jury wouldn't buy it.
He betrayed Ron big time. And then, to save his own skin, he hoped, he was willing to betray his new best friend, Nathan Blaylock.
For the moment, the case against Blaylock rested on Duncan Martinez's testimony. But to a jury, Martinez would be a questionable witness at best. Without more solid evidence, Nathan Blaylock might go free. Investigators have two suspects in the murder of a UCLA student. But one of them, Duncan Martinez, has cut a deal and can't be prosecuted. The other, Nathan Blaylock, may get off unless there's more solid evidence. At this point, investigators had no murder weapon, no other witnesses, and a motive that defied logic. At North Mission Road, there was one clue that might point to the killer.
One significant piece of physical evidence was the finding of human matter under Ron Baker's fingernails.
Ron Baker's fingernails. During the attack, his nails might have scratched the killer as they struggled. Just before Baker's autopsy, his nails had been trimmed and the clippings were stored as evidence. At the time, DNA testing wasn't widely available, so lab tests were run on the blood.
It showed that it was an AB blood, which was fortunate for us in that AB was only about 4% of the population.
Nathan Blaylock had AB blood. It was incriminating, but not enough to convict him. So investigators enlisted Blaylock's partner in crime, Duncan Martinez.
She agreed to talk to Nathan Blaylock on the phone, and we would record those conversations.
Nathan Blaylock was now in jail serving time for bank robbery. Duncan called his old friend saying he just wanted to keep in touch. Martinez steered the conversation toward Ron Baker's murder and Nathan's role in it.
Things like, remember when you got scratched on the rock wall, he says to Nathan, when you were tussling with Ron, and Nathan says, no, that wasn't from the wall, that was from him.
The conversation verified that the blood under Baker's fingernails was indeed Nathan Blaylock's. Later, the LAPD played snippets of the taped conversation for Nathan.
After hearing that, eventually he admits that he was the one that stabbed Ron.
Nathan was eventually tried and convicted of first-degree murder. But because of his immunity deal, Duncan Martinez remained free.
We weren't too happy about it because we thought that they both were involved in the crime.
Martinez couldn't be indicted for his statements to the LAPD. But he could be prosecuted if he told his story to somebody else.
The detectives were pretty sure that it was just a matter of time before he talked to somebody because he can't help himself.
Sure enough, Duncan Martinez talked.
He kept talking about it, and he was bragging about it. At that point, it became necessary for the district attorney's office to withdraw the immunity deal.
You have the right to remain silent.
Duncan was arrested and also charged with Ron Baker's murder. 6 years after Ron Baker was found in the train tunnel, the case went to trial.
It was just one of the most, I don't know, I guess, a big relief off my shoulders when we heard the words guilty.
And the price for betraying their friend? Both Duncan Martinez and Nathan Blaylock are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. The summer solstice homicide. One more case from the files of the Los Angeles County Coroner.